Hello, everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. Natalie Stillwell here with the Forming the Future series. And today I have Dr. Eve Rosno with me. Dr. Eve, would you mind telling us a little more about yourself and what you're doing these days?
Sure, and I'm excited to be here to talk to your audience. So as she said, my name's Dr. Eve Rosno, and you can just call me Eve. I am a wife and a mother of 4 kids. My oldest just turned 8, and then we have a 5.5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and about a 20-month-old. And so we're busy, and I work part-time as a psychologist. I see clients about one good long day a week, and I kind of joke that that's my day off. The mom is hard work, and sometimes you need something different. You need a change of pace. So that's what I do for a living, I guess you would say. And I have recently done a project called the Inspired Mom Summit, which hopefully some of you have heard of or taken in, but if not, hopefully we'll get you plugged into our community as well. And basically, I came from a place where, so here I am, I'm a psychologist, right? And I was single through my training, and I was actually trained in clinical child psychology formally, which is kind of ironic, really. And so I got out, and since then I've gotten other training, and I work primarily with adults. But anyway, so I just sort of assumed, I've always been great with kids. I always wanted to be a mom. I was so excited. My husband and I knew that we wanted me to be able to work part-time so I could be home with the kids as much as possible. But I had no clue how hard it was going to be. No clue how hard it was going to be. I mean, I thought that I would just be amazing at it. Here I am, like I always was great with kids. And then now I have this child psychology degree. Like I am just going to be a natural at this. And oh my gosh, was I so wrong. It was so hard, way harder than getting a doctorate degree, way harder than being a psychologist. It's the hardest thing that I have ever done. And it's just a struggle being at home with kids. It's a blessing. Of course, it's a blessing to be able to do that. But those are my most challenging times at home. And so and it feels so isolating sometimes, you just feel like you're alone, like you're just buried in diapers and toys and messes and meals and laundry. And I just knew that other moms probably had the same struggles and felt the same way, but I feel like we all sort of put this happy face on when we go out, and we want to live up to these expectations that other people have, and we put our best foot out there on Facebook, and everyone thinks everyone else's lives are all together and perfect, and at home, most of us are kind of a mess. And then we have this like cognitive dissonance, we have this push-pull where it's like, oh no, if everyone really knew the real me, if they really saw what my house was like, if they only knew this, and then we beat ourselves up. And it's just kind of a vicious cycle. So essentially, like, I just wanted to kind of break through that. I wanted to give moms some resources so that they wouldn't feel so alone, so that they could do better and be better, but yet also understand it's okay to struggle. So I created this summit, and it just finished up here in mid-January. And so we're hoping now to kind of create a community and kind of keep the momentum going and the connection going, and just a place for moms to really be authentic and real and kind of cut through the Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram version of ourselves and just find people that we can just connect with.
Amen. I loved the summit. I only got to catch the tail end of it, so I'm really hoping that it'll come back around soon so I can catch all of it. It was very, very encouraging, so thank you for what you're doing. Today I want to talk with you about breaking free from negative parenting habits that some of us, maybe we inherited them, maybe we just picked them up along the way. But I am wondering, we live in a broken world, we come from broken homes, there's all sorts of things we see here and there about parenting, but what are like the common negative patterns that you see a lot of moms struggling with today?
I would say what's most common probably is a lack of patience, which leads to anger. And so whatever that looks like for someone, maybe it's just a lot of yelling. Maybe it's, constantly making threats. And I don't mean physical threats, but I mean like your whole thing is like, it's just a cycle, or maybe you do respond physically in a way that it's not necessarily a horrible thing, but it's not the way you want to parent maybe. At the end of the day, you don't feel good about the way you handle things. And you might wonder, like, what am I teaching my kids? Like, what am I showing them about parenting? Did I show them enough love, or do I just feel like I was just angry all day and all I was doing was yelling and correcting? And are they really getting how much I love them? And am I getting how much I love them? Or am I cherishing them? Am I seeing the goodness in them, or am I so focused on the negativity? And so I think in general, we just sometimes can get this filter that we see our kids through where we become very critical, and we might micromanage them a little more. Like we just want them to be this way. And I think sometimes that weighs on us, and then it's very much builds and builds, and then we don't feel like we're respected, and so we feel like we've got to do more so that they will respect us or they will obey or whatever. But in general, I don't know, that's a lot, but I think that's where moms get so hung up. Like we imagined, like kind of like I said earlier, we imagined like, okay, what's life going to be like as a mom? And we imagine these like sweet exchanges and this just overflowing love and warmth and togetherness. And, they're just going to love me so much that they'll want to follow my directions. And if not, I'll lovingly guide them back, and we all have some of that. Of course we do. It's not all a struggle, but it's not very realistic to think that that's how it can be all the time. Of course we can work towards that. But to think that that's just going to be the norm, well, I don't think it is for very many moms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and while you were talking, I was thinking too, like you mentioned with your summit, you wanted to kind of break through the facades and give a voice to moms so they could be authentic. But I know, like, I've experienced elements of things that even scare me, like, wow, I didn't think I'd ever say cuss words at my children. I didn't think I'd ever grab them so harshly and just feel inside like I might lose it, that's really scary. So one thing I do want to ask too, starting out is, when our children experience these negative patterns that we find ourselves in, is there hope that they can be okay on the other side of this, that we're not going to like screw them up forever, that there can be forgiveness and healing in the family?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's never too late. It is never too late. And the fact that moms desire to do better, that's a huge step in the right direction. The fact that they even acknowledge like, hey, this isn't the best me. This isn't the parent that I want to be. Like that's huge right there, and kids are so resilient, and kids have a short memory. Now, granted, every now and then they'll pull something out from like, when they were like 2 weeks old. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but they'll remember this one thing, it's like, oh man, that's the one thing that I was really hoping that you would forget about. But kids can be filled back up so quickly. We can make huge differences in a very short time, especially when kids are young, but even when they're older, and I think in many ways, our relationship with our kids reflects our relationship with God. And, when we think about the way we love our children and the way our children love us, and we think about how we fail God so often, just because we're human, and how quickly he's waiting there with his mercy. And our kids are the same way. They want nothing more than for things to be good. with us. And so not that changing is easy or fast by any means. It is a rough, long road to make new habits, but you absolutely can make things right and make things better. So it's never something that you should say, I think I just blew it. I think I'm done. You know, like I'm never going to have that I want. No, that's not the case at all. You can always overcome.
Thank you. Well, let's dive into what are some practical tips for us as far as starting to break those patterns, or even maybe recognizing that we have this sort of problem habit with our children.
Yeah, well, I like to use, there's someone named Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and he talked a lot about he talked about how to discern God's will, but I really think the things that he learned and wrote about really map so perfectly onto our behavior as individuals, but as parents too. And the first thing that he talked about, and this is something we talk about in therapy all the time, in cognitive behavioral therapy, but we talk about becoming aware of our patterns. And so obviously the first thing we need to do if we're going to make something better is we need to see it as it is now. So we need to be aware of the areas that we feel like are not going so well. And I really think it's written on our hearts. I think we know. We know when things don't feel right. We know when we have that heaviness. We know when the kids go to bed and you're just thinking, that was not good. Like that was not a good day. There were too many hard things today. That is not how I want to parent. That is not how I want my kids to know me and think of me and remember me. And so I really think the end of the day, it's a really great time to just have a little bit of reflection. Think back over your day. Think about the times where you felt connected to your kids, where you felt joy, where you felt warmth, where you felt things went well. And then on the flip side, think about the times when you'd kind of like a do-over maybe, or you're not so happy with how it went, or their response to you, or the way you handled their difficult emotions, or those kind of things. And so do that at night to start to become aware of like, okay, it seems like, and you can even get in more detail than that if you want. It's great if you could take some notes even about different parts of the day time-wise, like the mornings are just always so hard. We always have a difficult time. We don't start the day right, yada yada yada. Or 4 o'clock at my house, like 4 o'clock until about 5:30 is just like, oh my gosh, everybody's like coming unraveled. Like I might be trying to make dinner or something, and a lot of not so good stuff happens in that hour. Or maybe it's bedtime. Maybe it's your bedtime routine. That's a huge struggle for parents a lot of times too, where it's like, oh, we go to bed angry so often, and we try to overcome it, but there's just so much tension from what's just unfolded, trying to get these kids to brush their teeth, to get their pajamas on, to say their prayers, maybe to stay in bed. And a lot of us just are exasperated by the time the kids go to bed. So thinking about in your day, like, how did I do? And you may have these little segments of time that you kind of roughly review in your head to try to look for those patterns. And then it's really helpful to look underneath the surface. A lot of writers have said anger is almost always like a blanket emotion. So anger is almost never anger for anger's sake. Anger always has more vulnerable emotions at the core. So maybe it's feelings of hurt, rejection, abandonment. Maybe it's fear. So you trying to figure out, like, what is that about? Like, why does that push my buttons so much? What is underneath that? Like, what does it trigger for me? And then sometimes then we can even go back farther. So, like, where does that come from? Why is it so important to me that my children are obedient to me? Like, what does that mean to me? What do I think that means to the world if I have obedient children? Like, is that the sign that I'm a good mom? And if I don't have obedient children, I'm not a good mom? Or is it that I don't want to be vulnerable, and so I want the whole world to see the perfect me, and my kids being obedient is the best way to achieve that? Like, if we're in public and they won't listen to me and they're naughty, well, then what's everyone think about me? Or, you know, those kind of things. So you really have to kind of peel back the layers like an onion. But the first start is really understanding the landscape. So where do I struggle most? What time of day? Maybe it's with one particular kid, or I have this issue with this child and I have this issue with this child. Like, why is it that one I have such a hard time with about this? Like, what is that? So really kind of being an investigator for yourself and figuring out. And sometimes, as hard as this is, sometimes it's good to ask your spouse or someone who knows you well, like, when you think about my parenting, like, what do you see that I do well? And what do you see that I probably need to improve upon? And, you know, that can be a difficult conversation because it's really easy to get defensive, and it's really easy to just like put the deflector up and like say, oh, well, yeah, but you do this, and oh, well, who are you to talk about that? Well, you do that too, and that kind of thing. But we can really get some valuable feedback from people closest to us as well.
You know, and as you're talking, it's making, like, it's just a revelation, this idea of like taking stock of what time of day, because I have some training in nutrition, and one of the things that we always encourage everyone to start with is do a food journal and keep track of your various symptoms throughout the day, and you'll start to see the correlation. And then, you know, you can make choices to eliminate the things that are triggering all the problems. So I never thought to do that with my family life and my parenting. I love that.
Well, and you know, that's something too that I think it could be very connected. Like, I honestly believe the reason why kids are so like off the wall at that time of day is they're hungry. Mm-hmm. They're ready for dinner and they're hungry. And maybe they got home from school and had like an empty carb snack, mm-hmm. but now that's worn off. And so they're crashing and they need substance, you know, they need something good. And that's why they're crazy. Or maybe it's our nutritional habits as well. Like, okay, I feel a little stressed. What do I gravitate towards? Maybe I want a soda. Maybe I want chocolate. Maybe I want, again, those empty carbs, which that's not going to help our mood either. And I don't want to go too far down this path, but I just have to share this too. I really feel like the health, and this is probably going to sound really out there for some of you, and I would have thought it was too, but I recently did a little cleanse, and this part of the cleanse was really focusing on my liver. Mm-hmm. And I had always heard people talk about how you hold anger in your liver, and I thought it was just silly. I thought it was foolishness. But I have to tell you, when I did that part of this cleanse, I was dramatically different at the end of that. Relate my temper, my patience, my ability to just kind of roll with the punches was totally different. And I did nothing else but this. This was the only thing that was different in my life. And so sometimes I really believe that the core of our parenting struggles may have to do with things in our physiology, whether it be hormones or whether it be just other nutritional or physiological things. Like I said, if your liver's a mess, like, that's going to wreak havoc in your body. And of course, I am not a nutritionist. I'm not qualified to give nutritional advice in any way, but I'm just speaking from personal experience. It made a dramatic difference for me almost immediately.
I'm so glad you brought that up, really, because I'm grateful that I had health issues before I became a mom, because that really woke me up to, what am I eating? You know, am I getting enough sleep? And doing some cleansing. And I had very emotional reactions during cleanses too, because there's a lot of toxic stuff accumulating in our bodies, and it's leaving our bodies in a constant state of stress, and we're depleted, and it absolutely affects the way I handle my stress reactions and interact with people and my emotions. So I think and
they say, you know, when we think about our mood, if you know very much about depression, anxiety, you've probably heard about serotonin. serotonin plays a huge role. It's a neurotransmitter. So like a chemical messenger in our body that it has a lot to do with our mood and our happiness or lack thereof. And, you know, they've recently said that like 95% of our serotonin receptors are actually in our gut.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes when we think about our behavior and we think about our parenting, we totally disregard, or we just don't even think it has anything to do with it. And I think it absolutely has something to do with it. So it's always something to consider. Not like it's the whole story by any means. And it's not like there aren't other avenues to work on this. But I think as full a picture as you can get of what's going on, the better chance you have at making a sustainable change instead of a quick change that then you just keep getting sucked back into the same patterns.
Now, also, we should probably take stock of other factors like our relationship with our spouse, or maybe, you know, if we have stepchildren with their parents, or financial stuff. I mean, are there other factors that can be causing a lot of our negative reactions and patterns?
Absolutely. I think, like, I use this analogy of a bucket. Like, we all have this bucket inside, and all of our stress, whether it's due to physical health problems, whether it's due to our job stress, whether it's due to parenting stress, whether it's due to marital stress, financial stress, it doesn't really matter. It all goes in this bucket that we have. And we can manage our stress, like we can sort of do okay as long as our stresses can be contained in that bucket. But once that bucket overflows, something physiological happens. And Dr. John Gottman is probably the preeminent marital researcher, and he's talked a lot about this, and he actually hooks couples up to all kinds of like probes and monitors, and they monitors every little verbal and nonverbal cue. And what he found is that when couples are having a stressful, you know, they kind of induce a stressful conversation for the sake of studying this. And so couples reach this point where like they're okay, and then all of a sudden it's like once they pass a certain threshold, then something changes. It's almost like a switch flips. And literally in your brain, it does. Something changes where you lose the capacity to use this front part of your brain, which is so important for being reasonable, rational, making good decisions, being logical. That part, it's like that part gets shut off, and we're operating out of the most primal part of our brain, which we've all heard of fight or flight, where your body goes into like threat mode. And so more than likely, you are either going to go into fight mode, which might be that yelling and that meltdown and that like, oh my gosh, you know, or it might be just being snarky and passive aggressive and condescending. It doesn't have to be like aggressive. So you might take that approach, or you might take the shutdown mode where it's like, I just cannot, like, I have to go away. I have to lock myself somewhere. I have to leave this house. Like, I cannot deal with this anymore. I have to shut down. And so that is what happens with when our stress threshold is surpassed. And so again, when we talk about this level of awareness, we have to know where we're at. How much is in my bucket? Like, how full is my bucket? Can I handle, is this a conversation I want to have right now? Or do I need to wait until I have a little more room? Like, I cannot manage this because I am this close. I have this much room, and that's not enough room for this type of battle. And I think that gets us in trouble with parenting a lot, because we're right there on the brink, and a child does something that like, oh, that was the last straw. Okay, we're overflowing now. And we do not feel like it's acceptable to say, I can't deal with this right now. I'll come back to this later. No, we feel like, oh boy, like it's on. They are going to learn. I'm going to teach them. They're not going to get away with this. I'm not going to let them walk all over me. And we just plow ahead, regardless of whether we have the capability to be reasonable and rational. And that's when we start throwing stuff out that's just ridiculous, you know, like you're staying in your room till bedtime. Well, it's only 2:00 in the afternoon or whatever, you know. When we get in this power struggle where we have to win, I will get obedience. I will not tolerate this, and I don't want them to get away with this. Like, we get in this, like, it has to be right now. And then I think that's when things just escalate. And as soon as one person's bucket is overflowing, well, it's a short trip to get everyone around you to the same spot, you know. And our kids feed off of our emotion. They are the barometer for us. And so as much as we like to think like they start the cycle, well, the way we respond and the way we come to something has almost everything to do with how they handle the situation. And so being aware of our own stress level, like, how are we doing here? Oh, did that switch flip for me? Or is it about to? If it is, I need to say nothing good's going to happen here. I'm not going to teach a good lesson here. I am not going to help them understand the problems with what they just did if I am not in an emotional place to be able to model level-headedness and reasonableness. Yeah. And so I think that happens a lot. And so it's not bad to let it go and come back to it. It's not that you're never going to talk to them about what happened. It's not that they won't have consequences for what happened. But right now, it's not going to serve anybody if you just plow ahead, trying to get some resolution.
So practically in the moment, it's just you and the kids at home. Somebody's scribbling on the wall, the other one's screaming. There's some behavior issue. What can you say, or physically, what could you do in that moment when you don't really have any other people to step in?
Yeah, you can't just go for a walk. You've got these kids who are depending on you. And yeah, well, one thing you can do is just practice some deep breathing. And I always thought that people were just kind of cheesy when they said, oh, take 10 deep breaths or whatever. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Well, I didn't realize that physiologically that changes you. Mm-hmm. So physiologically, when you take those deep breaths, so when you breathe in real deep down into your stomach, you know, from your stomach deep instead of shallow at the top of your lungs, what you're doing is the diaphragm presses down on your stomach, which presses back against a very important nerve, the vagal nerve. And so when that nerve gets stimulated, that activates that calming system in your brain. So you have the parasympathetic nervous system is the calming system in your nervous system. And so by doing some deep breaths, you can activate that calming. And so you can do that right in the moment. You can do that right there. And an easy way to help yourself do those deep breaths is to put your hands behind your back. Just hold your hands together behind your back, and it will like open up your chest carriage to like sort of open the way for those breaths to be deeper. Because I know sometimes when you're just thinking about it, you're angry, like it's hard to make that happen. But if you can change your posture a little bit, that can really help. And our kids pick up on that. If I start doing deep breathing, my kids more than likely are going to start modeling that without even realizing it. You know, like they say when babies are born, if they lay next to you, they sync to your breathing. Well, I don't think that goes away. I mean, our kids are aware of our physiology too. And so I think it will help calm them as you calm as well. So that is one tip. Another one is just distraction. You know, if you realize like, okay, like, I just want to cry and hide in the closet until 5:30 when my husband gets home. Well, that's not really an option. If you can just lay down, I sometimes talk about this with my clients, like you're in a tug of war with your kids. So here's what I want you to do. Lay the rope down. Just say, I'm not going to do that battle right now. I'm just going to set it down. I'm not invested in this outcome right now. I'm just deciding not to play. And I can come back to it, to whatever the discussion is later. But for right now, I'm just going to lay it down. And it's just saying, you know what? There is horrible behavior going on. There is so much stuff we need to do. But hey, kids, let's just watch some funny videos on TV, okay? Or let's turn on some music and have a dance party, okay? And sometimes just that unexpected response from you will totally turn your kids around. Like, it gets them out of their pattern. Like, they need a distraction to get out of their pattern too. And sometimes, honestly, at least at my house, when they're behaving the worst, they just need me. They just need me to be fully present with them. And if I can just stop whatever I was trying to do, even though I probably need to get it done, if I can just stop what I was trying to do and just be present with them, sometimes that's all they needed. And that's really was at the crux of their problems in the first place, you know? So that's a good thing to do. It's hard to do in the moment because, again, you've got this like determination that I am going to get the outcome that I want. And darn it, these kids are going to know that I'm in charge and I am the boss and they need to respect that. But if you can let go of that and say, you know what, that doesn't work. How has that worked for me? I've been doing that for how long? Is it working? No, it's not working. When I really need to focus on, I need to connect. I need to connect with them. I need to show them warmth. I need to show them love. I need to show them admiration. I need to show them I'm proud of them. And if they can, that helps to, and when they're filled up, they are going to be much more responsive to me. Not that that's why we do it, of course. Like, oh, I just want what I want, and I guess I'll love you so that you give me what I want. Not at all. But it's a wonderful side effect. It's a wonderful side effect of being able to do that. And a lot of times when my kids are the most like crazy and I look back and I realize I'm like, yeah, when was the last time, how much time have I spent like truly present with them today? And so if you can get yourself convinced that like, you know what, this will be better in the long run, even though it feels like I'm forfeiting, it feels like I'm like waving the white flag. Fine, let's just play, whatever. But often that's exactly what they need.
Parenting is a very humbling experience, and
oh yes,
and I love what you said. I just things I'd never thought to do. I really appreciate that suggestion. So we've talked about like really trying to dig deep and get under the hood and see what's triggering and why, and then a little bit of practical stuff of how to diffuse ourselves in the moment. But from there, I mean, what sort of things do we need to be focusing on to, I mean, should we be tackling strategies for dealing with those things under the hood? Is there some daily practices that we need to start putting into place, or more self-care? Or where else do we go?
I think the self-care is huge, because if you can lower the level in your bucket, you're going to just be in a better place. You're going to be able to do everything better if you can do that. And self-care is where that's at. That's how you do that. And that's one of the hardest things for moms to do. It's the hardest thing, A, to find time for, and B, to feel like it's a worthy investment of your time, energy, and money. Like, I know a lot of moms feel like, you know, they're kind of at the bottom of the list. Like, oh, we need all these other things. Like, the kids need these clothes and they have these lessons, and I just can't afford to go get a massage. Like, that's just not a valuable expense. Or I can't afford, you know, this exercise equipment or a membership at the gym or whatever it is. But I think we need to realize, like, we're not serving our kids are on empty. If we're running on fumes all the time, then, you know, like, what's the point? Like, we can't be the mom that we want to be. We can't be the wife we want to be if we are just empty. And so I think part of it is just convincing ourselves that, like, it will come back. It will pay for itself. You know, you will be rewarded so much if you do take that time out. And you know, sometimes it's difficult to find the actual time to do that. And so maybe it means like swapping with a mom. Like, can you watch my kids for 2 hours once a week so that I can go have some time to recharge? Or maybe it means you do it at kind of strange times, like early in the morning or late at night, that you take some time. And I think if we could help our husbands understand, you know, what this is about. Like, it's not me being selfish. It's me trying to be the best me I can be so that I have the best to give to you and to our children. Then, you know, they're going to be supportive. They're going to be supportive and help us find a way to make that happen.
Is it important that our children do see the struggle and the overcoming with the habits, and also see us putting our needs first sometimes? I mean, is that a positive for them to witness that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think so often kids they see the beginning and they see the end of things, but a lot of times they don't see the middle. Like, I think when this is the best example of this is like when if parents have a disagreement, sometimes kids see the fight and then they see that things are okay, but they don't ever see that middle part. And not that kids need to be an intimate part of every like disagreement process at all, but it's so important to show them the whole process so that they know. I mean, ultimately, what are we raising them for? We want them to be healthy, happy, holy adults who ultimately get to heaven. Like, that's what it's all about. And if they don't have these skills, then how do we expect them to be able to do that? And so as we're learning, it's okay to be humble. It's okay to say, and I think that's one of the biggest things we can do that helps almost virtually erase the bad interactions with our kids is to come, when we've made a mistake, come and sit down with them and get down on their level and say, I'm so sorry. Mommy should not have handled that way. You know, I'm really going to try to not do that the next time when something really upsets me. And almost always they're like, okay, I love you, Mommy. It's okay. And they're done with it. They're completely done with it. And they start fresh. But when we don't do that, then I think sometimes they're left wondering. They're left like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that meant. Like, I don't know what that was about. Like, was that okay? And like, does Mommy love me? Like, what's going on here? You know? But if you can just come back around and say, hey, yeah, that didn't go so good, did it? And then oftentimes what you'll hear is, yeah, Mommy, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that either. I'm like, oh, that's what we want. Those are the things we want. Like, how we got there is much less important than the fact that we can come back together and not do it with a guilt trip. And that's kind of hard sometimes. Like, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. But gosh, if you would just do this, Mommy wouldn't have to get so angry. Like, well, right. Yeah, you might be thinking that. Well, that kind of undoes it a little bit.
Right. And it's such a gift to give your children an example of that humility and being able to say, I'm sorry, because I feel like if we can at least give that to our children, they're going to have happier relationships with everyone else in the rest of their life.
Yeah. And they're going to see it's okay to make mistakes. Yeah. It's okay to make mistakes. Because sometimes I think that's where we get hung up too. It's like we're so caught up in like having to be perfect and having to be who we think everyone has to be, that it's not acceptable to have weaknesses. It's not acceptable to fail. And so then when we do, sometimes we just don't even want to acknowledge it, or sometimes we want to deflect it and make it all about someone else. Like, well, I wouldn't have done that if you didn't do this, or you deserved that, or whatever, because it's so hard for us to accept our own failings and mistakes sometimes. Yeah, so for them to see, like, yeah, even Mommy has a hard time with that, like, yeah, emotions are hard, aren't they?
Yeah, one thing I did want to ask is, how can we forgive ourselves if we do get really hung up on, I can't believe that I'm that mom right now? Like, how do we move on and bounce back and just get back on the horse and changing those patterns?
I think part of it is, one, doing that examination at night. Just, you have to acknowledge it. You have to really acknowledge where you struggled, and then you have to resolve to do better. And I think almost making a plan, when you've really kind of blown it, don't let yourself just forget about that. Like, no, I need to really examine that. I need to see how that happened. And I need to think about, like, what can I do different? Just like we do this with our kids all the time, but we sometimes don't do it with ourselves. So, okay, tomorrow is going to be the same story, right? Like, everyone has to get up. Kids have to go to school. That's always a struggle. What can I do to set myself up for success tomorrow so that I don't have that same battle? Mm-hmm. And then, this feels really cheesy, but it's super powerful. Visualization is so important for us. And so take some time to imagine it going differently. Imagine yourself handling that situation perfectly. Imagine what you would say. Imagine what you would do. Imagine how you would feel. Let your brain rehearse a successful time doing that, because what we do, we run over and over and over the mistakes we made. And well, guess what happens? Our brain is like making those circuits connect, you know? Yeah, and so we got to give our brain a better outcome to focus on, to practice, connect those circuits in our brain. Because, you know, I heard someone say this, and it really struck me, that our mind wants to do whatever we tell it. And so what are we focusing on? What are we telling ourselves? Are we telling ourselves, I'm never going to get this. I'm a horrible mom. Like, my kids are going to hate me. Like, I'm just always going to be angry. I'm never going to be able to control my temper. They're never. And we say that so much. If you think about your brain doing exactly what you tell it, well, guess what? You're going to keep struggling. That's going to be a struggle forever if that's what you're feeding yourself. So acknowledge it and then set it aside and say, no, I'm going to focus on the positive. I'm going to focus on what I want. I'm going to train my brain to see that as a reality instead of training my brain to see the opposite as my reality. And it's not denying that it happened. It's nothing like that. But we have to tell ourselves that we can do better. And then the more we tell ourselves, whether you believe it or not, you don't have to believe it. You don't have to believe it. But if you do this, your brain will start to make that happen for you. And I realize it sounds kind of absurd. I used to think it was crazy too. But physiologically, like, your brain really does respond to what you feed it. And so feed it good things, feed it success, feed it overcoming, and you'll find yourself doing that more often.
I love that. I also think that is a really great example for your children, because it's so easy to pass on a pattern of negative self-talk and kind of getting down on yourself instead of thinking of how you can solve it or envisioning how you can be awesome next time. That is really helpful. I love that.
Yeah, and like I said, it feels crazy. It feels really silly. But when you think like, no, I am affecting the way my brain works, and I'm not going to leave it thinking that this is what happens. Because, you know, our brain gets, it will work in the most efficient way possible. And so I have this example, and it's really silly. If anyone is from a farm, they're going to understand this. But when I grew up in the country, and we had some dairy cows for a while, and they would be out in the pasture. And so when it was time for them to come in to milk or to eat, they would all follow in this line down the hill. And so they wore this path in the hill. We used to call it the cow trail. So there was no grass that would run here, and it was nice and smooth because they always walked in the same path. Well, that's the way our brain works. Mm-hmm. It always tries to go in the most efficient, the most worn path. And so what is the most worn path in your brain? For a lot of us, it's not that positive, affirming, I'm going to be successful path. And so if we don't work to create a new adaptive path, by default, it's going to fall into that trail. It's going to fall into that well-worn, comfortable, I don't even have to think about it path, and we're going to get the same outcomes that we always get, and the same outcomes that we always think about.
Now, along these lines, as women of faith, is there anything that you do or you would recommend related to our relationship with God and growing our souls that would also help us break out of those patterns?
Yeah, I mean, I really think a lot of the way we parent is a reflection of our relationship with God. So the extent to which we understand God's mercy and allow His mercy into our life, His grace into our life, His forgiveness of us, the extent to which we seek that out and welcome that and believe in that is the extent to which we're going to overcome these patterns, and our children are going to understand that from us. So if we believe that like we are just unforgivable sinners, well, more than likely we're going to have a really hard time forgiving our children fully if we don't believe that we can be forgiven fully. And so really working hard on that relationship with God to allow yourself to feel that grace, that mercy, that forgiveness, to allow yourself to reset when you've had, some hard patterns, to say, okay, it's gone now. It's gone. I'm forgiven. I can start fresh. It just clears out all that built up junk, and so if you can do that and start again, and understand that relationship with God, then we're so much better able to model that in our relationship with our kids.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been very soul-watering and very affirming and so helpful. I am really happy we got to talk. If there's anything else you want to share, of course, feel free to add that in. But I would love for you to tell everyone how they can stay in touch with what you're doing.
Sure. There's a couple of places you can stay in touch. If you want to get on our email list, so you hear about all the things that are coming up and all the things that we're working on, you can go to www.inspiredmom.com. Now, you might see the page still up from the summit that we just had, but if you put your email in there like you're registering for that summit, even though it's over, we will get you on our list so that you will be able to stay up on what we're doing. Another thing you can do is we have a Facebook group, and that too is called Inspired Mom. And so you can find that and ask to join. It is open to all who just are looking for that kind of faith-based community where, like I said in the beginning, where we can be real and help each other grow and just try to live an authentic life. And so I would love to have you all join me there.
Yes, I highly recommend it. Look her up. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so, so much. It has been awesome to have you.
Thank you so much.